Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Best Boss Ever podcast series. I'm your host, Carl Thomas. So the question is, who was the best boss you ever had? Why? And what did he or she do that resonated so strongly with you? More importantly, how are you applying what you learned? From veteran founders and CEOs to emerging next-generation leaders, these men and women talk about their experiences in candid, fun, and insightful conversations. So stay tuned, because the hits just keep on coming. Today's guest, Rob Temple, has been operating at peak performance as a media executive for over 20 years. With recurring revenue growth, long-term value creation, and continual risk mitigation as his hallmarks, Rob is recognized as an expert in devising innovative marketing strategies and deal structures, with a long-standing track record of leveraging intellectual property rights packaging through media and marketing-based solutions. Over the course of his career, he's negotiated and led nearly $10 billion in rights fees and acquisition deals via sponsorship. An architect of sorts at ESPN, he conceptualized and developed College Game Day's flagship partnership with the Home Depot, now in its 18th year. As co-chair for the Walt Disney Company initiative, he designed ESPN and ABC's College Football Playoffs, CFP, as we've come to know it, and all of the commercial rights and sponsorship elements. Prior to joining ESPN, he designed Australia's Seven Network's Olympic telecast deal, advertising and sponsorship programming for Sydney 2000 Olympic Games, securing in excess of $56 million, Australia dollars that is, from 4 different advertisers compared to the network's prior efforts of the same amount, $54 million, across 225 advertisers. Clearly, for Rob, less is more. And in the year of COVID, he played prominent leadership roles for ESPN with Major League Baseball, the Little League World Series, and the X Games. Interestingly, he negotiated a deal with the Korean Baseball Organization, the KBO, which was one of the first live sports back on the air for ESPN during COVID, televising live games in the morning starting way back in May of last year, and delivered significant live game content for ESPN throughout the pandemic. Then, the unthinkable. He leaves the Walt Disney Company and ESPN and the hustle and bustle of New York City to Los Angeles back to Bristol, Connecticut, for a quieter, less hectic post as CEO of the remarkably creative agency Fishbait Solutions, with longtime friend and colleague Rick Jones. And while it might sound less hectic and more quiet, it's not. There are as many fish flopping around today as there ever was at ESPN. But above all, Rob is a passionate family man living in South Carolina, and he's a Tar Heel, slightly conflicted there, and he's currently serving a 4-year term on the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Visitors. Okay, Rob, that is a boatload of a career, and you're still going. I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. It's great to have you on the Best Boss Ever podcast series.
Thanks, Carl. Great to be with you again.
Well, listen, television and sports has been your mainstay throughout your career, and you've had your fair share of bosses. I know a little bit of the background here, but you tell us, who was your best boss or best bosses ever, and why?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate and blessed with great bosses, but I've always kind of looked at them falling into 2 key categories. And a lot of the bosses I've worked for fell into the category of people that inspired you, that engendered trust, and they really had a focus on empowerment. They empowered the people, that worked with and for them. And I'd put at the top of the list George Bodenheimer. I worked for Tim Smith, who worked at the PGA Tour with Dean Beeman and was commissioner of the NTRA. I worked for Kerry Stokes, the billionaire owner of the Seven Network. Ed Earhart, brought me to ESPN and was a phenomenal boss. And even Burke Magnus more recently on the programming rights and acquisition side, all phenomenal, all great friends, all great partners, all challenged me, all empowered me. But George had the most fascinating leadership style. He made me want to be a better executive. a better person. He made me want to deliver more for the company that he led. And he made me want to fulfill the mission of the company to serve sports fans anytime, anywhere. And his leadership was so humble, so authentic, so focused, so balanced, and so even with everybody. He treated everybody the same, no matter who you were in the company or outside the company. And he to me was always sort of my North Star when it came to somebody that I wanted to be more like as a leader, and certainly fits the best boss ever category for my career.
Well, those are great attributes for a leader. I had the good fortune to actually sit in George's office a while back. I won't date myself, but I found him to be as genuine and as focused as you've just described him. From an outsider's perspective, looking in, when George chose to step down, I think that might have created a little bit of a challenge for Bob Iger, who was obviously then the CEO and chairman of the Walt Disney Company. Is replacing a leader like George Bodenheimer is not easy. And, you just need to look at the recent history of that to figure out how difficult that really is. That's a great call.
Yeah, it was fascinating, though. In classic George fashion, he did everything he could before handing over the reins to secure stability for everything that he touched and influenced and controlled. So it was fascinating how he chose to hand over the reins and win. And while we ran into issues at ESPN, a number of years later for various reasons, some existential issues with how the legacy distribution system and marketplace was changing, and other issues that were self-inflicted, whatever they were. But I can tell you that George never made it about himself. He always had the best interest in the company, both the Disney and ESPN company, and his people in mind. And I just know for a fact how hard he worked to renew deals, to position things properly, to put the right leadership in place. It was really remarkable to watch that, the selflessness. It was never about celebrating him. It was about putting the company on firm footing for going forward. And then things happened from there. But watching him go through that process was a learning experience in and of itself.
And succession planning, particularly in a large organization like the Walt Disney Company, with arguably one of the top two or three internal properties/divisions in ESPN, succession planning is a huge challenge, and done well and successfully, it can and should be seamless. And I think Bob Iger is going through that right now. I mean, I know for a fact that George and Bob had a great relationship. I don't know this for a fact, but Bodenheimer would probably call out Iger as one of the best bosses he ever had, if not the best he ever had. And I know with the appointment of Bob Chappell a couple of years back, that Iger is judiciously planning the succession and his final departure from Disney with great care, in the same way that you just described George doing at ESPN.
Yeah, and I think his installation of Jimmy Pitaro was really helpful, because when George was there, like you said, we always felt like we were in alignment with Bob. And in Bob, we trusted. And now we trust in two Bobs, Bob Chapek and Bob Iger. And I, for one, was glad to see Jimmy come in, because he had a great relationship with really both Bobs, and a love for sports and ESPN and an understanding of the business. And so anytime you're better aligned with the parent company and the leader, the ultimate leader, it's better for the company.
No doubt. I want to ask you now, Rob, this is kind of a state of the state question, and then we'll get a little more granular here. But the linear television business, as you and I have grown up in it, is in a dramatic state of change, and it has been for some number of years. COVID arguably accelerated many of those changes. Streaming was already here, but it got faster and wider and more ubiquitous over the past 12 months. Linear television was always a ratings story. That's how you so successfully architected those sponsorship and rights and advertiser deals, because you could deliver, eyeballs, right? Audience over the course of a season or a game, or in the case of multi-year deals, over the course of a franchise. So talk to us a little bit about your perspective today on the state of the television industry.
Well, it's extraordinary, really. I think right now, what we've seen for the last 4 or 5 years, and the increased velocity on it in the last 12 months because of broader changes, but particularly the pandemic and the change in impact on consumer behavior is remarkable. But I think it's only a precursor to the next 6 to 10 years that are going to continue that acceleration and that trajectory and be pretty disruptive. And so the companies that can figure out, as Ed Earhart would say, as the new game is played, what the rules are, where to be, how to play it, those are going to be the winners. But the game is changing so significantly, and the people with their hands on the levers of value creation and risk management are trying to work the levers on one side of the equation with what was one of the most successful dual revenue business models in the history of media and industry. ESPN, and that model was wildly successful. But clearly, if you look at the stock price this week, there's a new model in town that's working pretty well. And so managing the implications and the rights and the value and the revenue and risk and cost and all the dynamics around the legacy ecosystem while trying to stand up the new business model and ecosystem is both science and art. And it will be disruptive. There will be significant corrections in that marketplace. There will be winners and losers, and the game will be played differently. There's different rules will apply. The ability to really know and control and own the levers of value creation and risk reduction for your property and for your brand is going to matter. Being closer to your fan and understanding how to value those fans that are loyal to your brand or your property, both in terms of the typical things you would do with media rights, ticket sales, sponsorship, those things, but also translating that into transactional revenue with their behavior, not just, with your sponsors and your tickets and your games and your events, but transactional revenue with their purchase behavior globally, where they travel, what they buy. That loyalty that a property has with its fans has value beyond the specific current revenue dynamics of a property. And so the rules are changing, the game's different. There's going to be a lot of corrections in the marketplace, and it's going to be really difficult. But I think there will be models of rights holders and brands that figure it out and that will lead the way. Some of it's going to be, by luck and good fortune because of the industry they're in or the natural kind of velocity that they have. Others are going to be able to tell that somebody really smart has redesigned the architecture of their game plan to succeed in this disruptive environment.
Well, that's really insightful because the technology backbones, which you and I well understand, but the general public doesn't, all they know is, I want this content. I want it over my 4K television in the living room or the family room or wherever. And if it's disrupted in any way, I'm not happy. I don't care what the backbone looks like. I don't care what bandwidth. I don't care about any of that. But you and I know that without that, we're all challenged from the industry perspective. So you calling out rights holders, brands, and the sort of holy grail deliverable there, which are the fans, the audiences, and if you will, the nations that, and I'm using that in context, right? I mean,
Yep.
If you're an Arsenal fan, it doesn't matter where in the world you are. You are an Arsenal fan, period. And you will consume the content and you'll buy the merchandise and you'll support that club all day, every day. And sort of share with us a little bit about how you extrapolate that and you turn that into what you've described as transactional revenue.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I've noticed in the pandemic is it has caused people to reevaluate who they trust, what they trust. So if you noticed the brands that you know and recognize for Procter & Gamble, for other companies have surged back into relevance and growth. People want a really good Wi-Fi at their house. They want to know that their kids can be in school. My kids have been in school 5 days a week since August. They want to know that they're connected to the brands that they love, and they want trust more than anything because the pandemic created a lot of distrust, and the politics of today creates a lot of division and disinformation and distrust. So people are sort of nesting And you're seeing categories benefit from that loyalty to brands and trust. And that goes to rights holders too. I live in outside of Greenville, South Carolina. You're not going to be able to get a Clemson fan disconnected from Clemson. They're going to watch it, consume it any way they can. That loyalty, whether it's Arsenal, whether it's in any property around the world, when I lived in Australia, the Wallabies, the Sydney Swans, like
Right.
whoever you were loyal to, that fandom and that loyalty is part of your trust. It's part of what you grew up with. It's part of what you share with your family and your children and your legacy. Me being a Tar Heel was mentioned. That matters. And I think that is part of the trust circle, and brands and rights holders are going to figure out how to be involved in a better way in that trust circle and how to monetize that more effectively. Technology can be both a disruptor and it's also obviously an enabler. And I think there's already technology coming out that we're looking at that moves properties into a better position to leverage and capture and what I would call set the advantage, meaning set the advantage in their favor for transactional revenue and to be involved in that. And so the more they do to connect brands with fans, meaning brands with their property and their fans with their property, the better they're going to do in translating that into what I would, call kind of the new paradigm or the new economy around, sports and entertainment content.
Right. And with the overlay of the pandemic and, God willing, with vaccinations and herd immunity and all of the things that we hear about pretty much all day, every day, the fog is beginning to lift, right? So we're going to head into the latter half of 2021 with a much more robust sports ecosystem, if you will. But here's a question I have, and you're going to be able to shed some light on this. What I will call next generation sports fan, let's just call it the age 16 to 24 right now, that 8-year window, just pre-college and then the couple of years post-college, they have so many distractions, pushes and pulls, overlay the pandemic, overlay virtual learning, overlay all of what I think are way under the radar potential mental health issues for that age group. How do we, the broader we, societally and in the world of sport, help those kids gravitate, migrate to those sort of values that you just ticked off?
Well, it's a broader question. That's a deep question. I'm not sure I could fully answer, but I do think it goes to the issue of trust. Trust has been disrupted for kids in school, in their daily lives with their friends. Trust has been disrupted somewhat in sports as they've moved away from sports into gaming and other things. And so all of us have to figure out, whether you're in the media industry or a rights holder or a brand or in whatever industry you're in, how do you reestablish trust with that audience? Part of it, for example, I loved what the NFL did in the playoffs this year, where they had a version of an NFL playoff game on Nickelodeon. And all of a sudden you had kids with their dads watching that experience and being sort of surprised and delighted at the animations that came on screen with the touchdown, or the kid that popped up on the bottom third graphic that said, hey, that was a false start. Kind of like when my mom scolds my dad for eating before we say grace. Like it was like, what? It was great. It was real. It was authentic. It was fun. It was different. It was graphic. It was kids. And we've tried that with the megacast for the CFP 13 versions, hometown versions, home game versions. I think what you're going to see is an attempt by the brands, the rights holders, and the media companies try to connect with those kids in a different way. If you're a gamer and you're used to co-viewing content with your friends, our content, you might still be documenting a game objectively for a mass audience, but there might be derivative forms of that content for micro or niche audiences that allows for predictive gamification and an experience with graphics and other dynamics and co-viewing for kids in that age group you're describing that brings them back to the values and to the experience in sports that they'll love, and hopefully gets them back out on the pitch, back out on the court. So I think it's about everybody understanding that audience and looking at how to reestablish trust with their fan base, with their brands, with their business dynamics, and challenging convention. Challenging convention. I just did a rights deal through 2030 for the Walt Disney Company. We tried to build in there mechanisms to future-proof it, both with force majeure language and other things with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, but also with rights and technology and capabilities and partnership and a broader depth across the Walt Disney Company that I hope is one of the annuities, whether it's College Game Day built by the Home Depot that I hope still there in 2030, or the Little League World Series and how it blossoms together, or MLB and what we did there to expand the Wild Card Series round and so many other things. It's about taking chances and innovating, but you got to manage risk when you're doing that. And you've got to find a way to reconnect with that audience that feels disconnected or distrustful of how the content and the brands have been either neglecting them or missing them or not engaging them in the best way.
Right. No, that's so true. While it is a really hard question to answer completely, you've done a really good job of sort of assessing where you are. I mean, that Nickelodeon overlay on the NFL game was creatively brilliant. And that's, from my perspective, while we all know the rules of the game are changing, you don't know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. But the creativity that organizations, brands, right holders, leagues, teams, events bring to not only the game day experience or the event day experience, but how that experience can be amplified and creatively overlaid with differentiations, right?
Yeah.
That appeal to audience segments. And that's what you and Rick Jones are faced with right now with Fishbait Solutions, right? I mean, you've got great relationships with brands, great relationships with right holders, and those are looking to you as a third-party agency to help them answer these questions.
Yeah, I couldn't be more excited. I mean, I think particularly right now when a lot of brands or industries or segments or rights holders have been challenged due to the pandemic, whether it's with ticket sales or product sales or disruptive technology with their fans and how they go to market and other things. I'm ecstatic because there's a willingness to innovate, there's a willingness to change, there's a changing of the guard in a lot of cases where people that held on too tight to the former ecosystem and the legacy process that they were used to are having to embrace new thinking and empower new people that can bring new solutions to bear. And I've always said I'm fortunate because I'm a little bit of a unicorn in that I sat on the revenue and marketing value creation side. I've negotiated commercial rights and IP. I've negotiated broader media rights deals. So as Burke says, I sat on the check writing and check cashing side. And I think that's helpful. I've worked a lot in the college space, but I've also worked on the Olympics globally and in Australia and other places. I've worked on the World Cup. I've worked on a lot of different things, and all of that gets mixed into the stew of trying to help solve problems. That's the first thing Rick and I do when we go in to see a brand or sit down with the rights holders. We ask them, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And do we have an ability to bring different ideas that can mitigate risk and unlock greater value to do that? And I think part of that is what we're trying to do, bring country music into college football and college sports, create lifestyle content connections between outdoors and country music and college sports, but also find other connections between, college sports and the Olympics and a whole bunch of other things, bring in technology that can unlock transactional revenue for rights holders off their fan base. I mean, there's a bunch of really cool, innovative opportunities there that I think are going to be, as Tim Smith would say, who I worked for originally, it taught me the art of a great deal is when everybody wins.
Right.
And that's kind of core to my DNA. I don't do short-term deals. I don't do one-sided deals. I try to design an architecture that'll be sustaining for the long term, that'll leave annuities, if you will, like a College Game Day built by the Home Depot or the CFP architecture or the NCAA Corporate Champion and Partner program that I designed in 2001 that still exists today. And whatever that is, or the rights deals for ESPN through 2030, it's an attempt to unlock value where everybody wins so that eventually you can unlock more value together and keep that partnership strong. I mean, the thing I was most proud about with the Little League is that's the second oldest relationship between a media partner and a rights holder. CBS and the Masters, I think, goes beyond that. But 1963 is when Little League and ABC initially came together. And then, of course, Disney and ESPN is part of that. But it's something we're really proud of, and it's a great global property, and it's a beautiful architecture that we designed to go forward together.
Those things they don't last that long, Rob, as you know, without the relationship being win-win. So that I think is so fundamental to
Goes back to trust.
it. Totally does. So you just ticked off a couple of things, and I think you and I could agree that from a global perspective, sport, whether it's football or football, whichever way you spell it, right? Or Aussie rules or FIS World Cup skiing or international triathlon competition, sport has a way of cutting across language barriers, geographical barriers, socioeconomic barriers, political barriers, all of that thing. I mean, the Arsenal fan in Shanghai is just as fervent as the Arsenal fan around the corner in London, right? Music, exactly the same way. I mean, the globality of music, you just watch what Spotify is doing right now. They just are about to open 70 more countries.
Yeah, watch country music. Country music's really fascinating. They have seen, we were on recently with the president of Sony Music out of Nashville and his team, and they've seen just extraordinary growth in streaming because of the pandemic. Country music is often music that is very relatable, it's storytelling, it's approachable, it's safe often for families to listen to. And they have probably surged in terms of streaming and downloads almost more than any other music genre out there. They've got more diverse artists coming in every definition of diversity. And I think you're going to see country music go through a really fascinating evolution over the next 10 years when you have the 250th celebration of America in 2026. You have a World Cup coming to North America in this decade and an Olympics coming to LA in 28. So the world's coming back to the US, hadn't been here for a while. The world's coming back to the US. And just like the roaring 20s and the 1920s were a huge boom globally in a lot of ways after a Spanish flu pandemic in 1917, I think there's the chance, certainly for the US, for a significant trajectory of growth over the next decade as all of these things get mixed in. And I think country music's going to benefit from that in a lot of ways. You look at their streaming numbers and some of their artists and what's happening globally beyond the US. I think they're poised to do great things in the US, but also great things globally.
Well, that global part of it is super interesting because anybody listening to this would go, wait a minute, come on. Nashville's Nashville and quintessentially American, and country music is quintessentially American. And how can anybody forecast that there's a global audience for country music? I happen to agree with you. The creativity of singer-songwriters in that genre is arguably as brilliant as any other artist in any other genre that you can name.
Yeah, so here's the story. I had the president of Sony Music tell me, he talked about a story where he took two of the most famous country music artists over to London, and they promoted and everything, had a very small crowd at that venue. And that was maybe 15, 20 years ago. And more recently, right before the pandemic, they took one of their younger artists over to London, sold it out instantly. So the streaming numbers, the familiarity, the accessibility, that connectedness to that truly American, uniquely American, very diverse, if you look back to the roots of country music, genre of music is very relatable, and not just in Australia and other places, but it's really digital streaming, and that content is really helping that genre of music move all over the world.
Well, I love to hear that. I'm a huge Spotify fan, and I'm also a business guy, so I follow what they're doing, and I made mention of it. But just this week, I read that the next, if you will, chapter in Spotify is opening up 70 plus international markets to the platform. And when you got a singular platform that can cut across the length, right? Because it sits in the cloud and all you need is bandwidth to get to it. Now, all of a sudden, the president of Sony Country Music's vision is amplified that much more.
Yeah, if you think about basketball, people thought people were crazy in the NBA to let the NBA players play in the Olympics in Barcelona. But look at the return on that investment. Look at the growth of basketball over the years since the Dream Team performed in the Olympics in the early 90s and what the investment has brought back. Look at the global players, the quality of them coming back, inspired by those players in the early 90s and others. And it's now coming back not only to improve the NBA from a diversity and a global standpoint, but it's made better fans and better connections all around the world. I think you're going to see the same type of thing with music, whether it's artists being inspired and having access to digitally downloaded and streamed content. It's going to inspire another group of artists, and it's going to add growth over a long term.
No, I completely agree with you. And the beauty of music is the barriers to entry are really low, right? You don't have to be a Michael Jordan or a LeBron James to position basketball, as you just described, on a global platform. If you have talent, you're going to start small, obviously, whether it's a YouTube channel or whatever, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And that's how artists are discovered. I remember I spent 6 years at Universal Studios. Back then, we were the largest music company in the world, having just acquired Polygram, right? Oh, that was a big, big deal, $10 billion plus. But at its core, Doug Morris, who's still in the music business, was running the division, and he got up in front of the entire company, and everybody was scratching their head, what the heck, what the heck, what the heck? And he said it very simply. We stand for and are relentless about finding new artists and developing those artists and helping give them a platform because they're so talented. We don't care where they come from. I'm investing a lot of money to find them.
Or what they look like.
That's right.
So the technology and the streaming and distribution, and that'll only get greater with 5G and other enhancements. It really enables the democratization of this content. It really empowers the individuals. Social media lets them get a following. They can move into a revenue model more quickly by distributing their content. And it is about quality. It's the same thing that happened in the Olympics. When the Olympics were recreated in 1896, you only had a small sliver of athletes coming and competing. But as the Olympics got more successful and more commercial, as Andrew Young used to say, it also led to the democratization of the Olympics, meaning athletes suddenly from 200 plus countries all around the world, and times were dropping and performance were improving. That's all part of this. That's a good thing.
I completely agree with you. It's a really good thing. Listen, Rob, we've got a few minutes left, and we're going to talk now about the sort of 4 regular bits we do on every episode of the Best Boss Ever podcast series. So over the course of your career, over the course of anyone's career, mistakes get made. In fact, bigger mistakes get made when you've got a brilliant boss behind you, because one of the key factors in leadership is to give you enough room to fail. So your favorite mistake, the one you learned the most from over the course of your business career?
There's so many of them because I was always willing to leap and trust that the net will be there. And the net is often there with the opportunity and with your boss providing it. And so I was kind of a leaper. And so I had a lot of them, but I did something in 2006 when we had just acquired the NASCAR rights for 8 years. And I stood up in front of the entire ESPN sales force and introduced this concept that I had developed with my team called the NASCAR icons. And I introduced them with this explanation that NASCAR is so cluttered, organically, logos on teams, tracks, titles, all the other stuff they have, drivers, that this would deliver clarity and dominance, that these NASCAR icons would deliver, we'd organize speed around speed on all of our platforms with a brand. We'd organize communication around brilliant strategy, but literally got laughed at in the room. Now we sold the heck out of it. We aligned brands. We saw it was the only year that we knocked it out of the park with NASCAR. And after that, ratings took a dive. But I get teased about it all the time. In fact, when I sent a farewell note to some of my team, I said, hey, I'm taking it on to my new adventure with Fishbait Solutions, diving in with clarity and dominance. And they all just died laughing. So I learned a lot from it. It got pulled down after a year or so, partly because we didn't have the digital nonlinear rights. It was a complicated thing to design for the fan to connect brands with fans if you didn't have the rights assembled correctly in the grant of rights from the rights holder, and if you didn't have the full support from the editorial and content people. And so, for me, that was a mistake. But Ed Earhart said, "Good try, keep it up."
Yeah,
it was worth it.
Right, the correct rights package. Right, the correct rights package. Support from the editorial side, as you call it, the content creator side, and bring in the fuel called the commercial rights. And that 3-legged stool is brilliantly done if executed the right way.
Yeah, after that, I got more involved with our programming and legal team on the acquisition of rights, designing the commercial architecture. I remember I came in after we secured the CFP, the brand new college football playoff rights. 5 days later, right after Thanksgiving, presented my strategy to Ed Earhart and his lead sales team. And one of them said to me, "It was Thanksgiving. How in the world did you do this in 5 days?" And I said, No. I've been doing this for 2 years. I've been designing the commercial architecture in the rights negotiation with Burke and his team for 2 years. I simply wrote it in 5 days, but we negotiated it, signed it last week, and here we go. Like, that was the point of it. Different from the NASCAR Icons, where I wasn't involved in that deal.
Right.
I designed something I thought was great, and it worked for a year, but then it crashed and burned on the third turn.
Yeah, well, I got it. The bank was a little steep, right?
Yeah.
Next one. Just talked about country music. Your favorite female artist, band, singer, songwriter?
Well, there's a lot of country music artists that I'd love to put out there. But when you ask me this question, sometimes you just go with your gut.
Totally.
And I grew up as a big James Taylor fan, Carolina on My Mind, Chapel Hill, all that. And Carly Simon always was sort of a coming of age voice for me. I admired what she did in music, but I also found it fascinating how she crossed into kind of a commercial marketing branding with Anticipation, with Heinz Ketchup and The Spy That Loved Me. She did a lot of interesting music for Bond film and other things. So there's some reason she jumps out more than others that I admire and love and adore. But Carly Simon was sort of my top of my list.
I love that pick. And when you said James Taylor, I started to write down, it's got to be Carly Simon. Your favorite track?
Probably Anticipation. I love You're So Vain because it's sort of a coming of age film that when you're a kid and you hear that song, you immediately think it's about you, as opposed to the story behind it. It's like Fire and Rain or other things. You learn the story later. But I've always loved Anticipation. It just gives me a great feeling, and it sort of fits my perspective with, looking forward with what's to come.
Right. Great song. Thirdly, next one. Humor plays, I think, I've always believed, a massively positive role in the workplace. So is there a humorous moment, maybe the one where you avoided a mistake or you diffused tension, where it made a positive difference?
I think often and speak in visual terms. I tend to articulate myself in visual constructs. And I repeat, when you're managing 100 plus people or whatever the staff is, I make up words, I repeat words, particularly from a marketer standpoint. And so my staff, people that worked with me and for me, would always laugh at not only the words I would create and coin for things, but at the way I would kind of design them into conversation. And so one day I was doing a huge meeting presentation with the staff, and one of them in the back of the room yelled, "Bingo, I got it. And I looked around like, what in the world is going on here? What are you guys doing? Aren't you paying attention to this? And they all held up these cards and they're playing Temple Bingo. They'd taken all the words that I say all the time, and they had made sheets and handed it out to everybody. And whoever got 5 in a row first yelled bingo, and they had some lottery prize. It was absolutely hilarious, and it broke the whole crowd up. So we ended up actually filming a spot about it for an offsite we did with this. It was really funny, but it was humor at my expense, but it was good humor because it showed me a connection that I was having with them that was even beyond kind of what I had expected, that they felt comfortable enough to do that with me in a meeting, but also that the approach I was taking with that sort of relatability on words and getting them to understand the value of finding swim lanes, for clients and properties, and just the different things that I use to describe, what we do, was resonating, and it was hilarious.
Well, trust me, without them feeling like they had the green light to do that, they wouldn't have done it. And two, and most importantly, they obviously did it with a huge amount of respect and love for you as a leader. And when the whole place cracks up, everybody wins, right?
That's right. That jumped out for sure.
That's great. Last one, the pithy one. Words matter, especially in a leadership role. What you say, what you don't say, how you say it, voice inflections, all of those things matter. So your favorite word and why?
My favorite word is, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. My tendency is to leap and trust that the net will be there. I've always taken chances. I grew up with modest means, so I didn't have a lot to lose. I sort of made my own way through this business, this career, this industry. and have been very fortunate. So my favorite word is faith, both from a business standpoint, being optimistic, being faithful of opportunity and success, taking chances, and also from a personal standpoint. I've had challenges. I've lost a wife to cancer. Both my parents passed away and struggled with illness. And to have faith that better times were ahead, that new opportunities were around the corner. It's part of, for me, how I've designed my life, how I raise my kids, how I partner with my best friend and wife, Betty, and how I try to project my lens onto those that I deal with and work with and influence. And so that word means a lot to me. It goes to my core, and I translate it in different ways, both from a business and personal standpoint.
Powerful word, Rob. Thank you so much. Amen to that. You have been so gracious with your time. I can't thank you enough. This has been a terrific episode, and I want to wish you and Rick Jones best of luck as you embark on yet another fascinating chapter with Fishbait Solutions.
Thanks, Carl. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate us at Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Spotify, Google, Pandora, and many others. Please visit our website at thebestbossever.com, where you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next week, remember, words matter.